Okay, so here we go. Mr. Dixon here, and welcome to video number 1. So I had a couple false starts, but what I want to do is put out a couple of videos that go ahead and help you prepare for Exam 2. Exam 2 is coming up, and as you know from the revised syllabus, you'll have a window of opportunity from March 31st to April 4th to do Exam 2 on Canvas. What I wanted to do is run through a little bit from chapters 6, 7, and 8. This is not going to be in-depth. This is just to reinforce what I've already lectured on, what you've already been reading about in your book and chapters, and again, just to reinforce your notes and focus your attention here. So they're going to be quick videos, again, covering 6, 7, and 8 in a review. So let's begin by talking, chapter 6 is we talked about the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. So if you recall, we have something that looks kind of like a demand curve, right? Now, what's the difference between this demand curve and the aggregate demand curve? Well, what this shows is the demand for a single item, a market for something like pizza or tacos or something like that. So what we'd have here is price. What we'd have here is quantity, right? How's that different than aggregate demand? Well, aggregate demand, instead of being the demand for a single output, a single service, it's output for, or it's the demand for all output, right? So it's the demand for all goods and all services. And as soon as you account for that, that becomes aggregate demand. As soon as this becomes aggregate demand, if you're looking at the demand for all output, all goods, all services, then this becomes price level, because you're looking at all prices now, right? And then this becomes quantity of real GDP. And the best way to understand that is aggregate demand. How do you really measure aggregate demand? How do you know what all that demand is, and how do you account for it? And the easiest way is to look what people are spending on it, or look what different sectors of the economy are spending on it. So we know that for the consumer sector, for households, right, we can look at their consumption spending, right? And we can look at spending for businesses, which is investment. And then we can also look at government spending. And those three expenditures from those three sectors of the economy add up to aggregate demand. We're not going to talk about the foreign sector, and we'll leave that out. This is an introductory course, so for right now we'll just leave that out. But there you go. Now, what explains the downward sloping of the demand curve? Well, if you recall from your book in chapter 6, there's 3 things that help explain or help us understand why aggregate demand is downward sloping. The first is the real balance effect. Yeah. I hope you can read that. Leave comments in the comment section there, and you can go ahead and flame me, or give me constructive feedback. If the sound level's not good, lighting not good, let me know. But real balance effect. None of them is the interest rate effect. And then lastly, the international trade effect. Go ahead and look up the definitions of those in your notes. Reread the definitions in the book, but be sure you're familiar with all 3 of those in terms of how they affect aggregate demand. Just very quickly, the real balance effect, right? So as price level decreases, right? So we start with the price level up here, and some quantity of real GDP that associates with that. As price level would decrease, what happens? Your purchasing power increases, and all of a sudden now a greater quantity of real GDP is demanded, and that helps explain the downward sloping. Okay. Now, one other thing, and then we'll stop this first video and kind of see how it's going. But what would cause? Well, first of all, will a change in price level cause aggregate demand to shift? No. Right? A change in price level, we have a change in price level here, and you see aggregate demand stay the same, so there's no shift. What there was movement along the demand curve. But a change in price level will not cause aggregate demand to shift. What will? Well, anything that affects these, right? So again, look in the book, but an increase in taxes, right? That's going to take money out of consumers' pockets, and you would expect the aggregate demand to shift to the left. An increase in wealth. In the case of businesses, if the input costs go up, things like taxes or wage rate, things like that increase, then the aggregate demand will shift over to the left. A decrease in taxes, things like that, would cause it to increase. So go ahead and review that in your notes, because we've already talked about this, right? But look at your notes, look at the book, and I'll be right back, and we can talk about aggregate supply.